Hi folks, so welcome back to the Sankey Canal in Lancashire. In the first video we looked at the early days of the canal and why it claims to be one of the first industrial canals in the world, and the first in mainland Britain. Meanwhile, I jumped on the old bike and followed its route, seeing some relics that are nearly gone and magnificent monuments that continue to stand the test of time. In this video we'll carry on along its route past yet another viaduct, and along its two extensions to Fiddler's Ferry and finally Widnes. But I also want to look at why the Sankey fell into disuse and was partially lost. Why was the country's first industrial canal abandoned? And what hope is there for the future? But first, picking up where we left off, let's travel to the outskirts of Warrington and see how the recent floods have had an impact.
Right, so this is quite interesting now. You can see there's been a lot of rain recently and the level of the brook water has come right up. But what's happened is the old canal used to divert down this way, and the flood water has actually overspilled here, blocking the footpath, so I can't keep going this way. But it's actually channeling itself down the old canal route there. It's quite interesting. I'm going to have to obviously go around and try and find where I wanted to go anyway.
After the canal's closure, the brook was diverted down the canal channel, until here where a new cutting joined it back up with its natural watercourse. The canal diverted this way towards Busey Hall. Next to the hall is Busey Lock. On the original 1757 canal cutting, this would be the first lock boats would come to if they were heading to St Helens. There was a lockkeeper's cottage here next to the lock, which was so remote that it had no electricity or gas. Drinking water had to be carried in buckets along the towpath. The lock is interesting because it has this long bywash to keep water moving past the lock during times of flooding. The overflow here prevented the lock itself from overspilling, and interestingly, there's a date stone here next to the overflow showing the date the lock was rebuilt. The water was so polluted with chemicals that the mortar between the stones had weathered away, meaning an expensive rebuild was needed in 1865.
Right, so we've come to the second viaduct of the day. This is the 7 Arches viaduct in Warrington. Because of 7 stone arches, you'll notice there's also one in the middle which isn't a stone arch, and that is because this viaduct isn't as high as the Sankey viaduct. It's not half as high as the Sankey viaduct, it's incredibly low. So you're probably looking at it thinking, well, what was the point in building the Sankey so high so that boats could get underneath with their masts if they're going to build this one further downstream where boats can't get past with their masts? Well, that section in the middle used to be an iron girder section, and I believe it lifted up, however way it lifted up, to get out of the way to allow boats with big sails, so the Mersey flat boats with the big sails, to get past. So yeah, quite ingenious for its day. This was built in 1873. It's part of the Liverpool to Manchester via Warrington railway, so there's a second line from Liverpool to Manchester really. So yeah, what a landmark. Right, so I've come to quite a significant point in the canal now. At this point, this is a bend in the canal at somewhere called Sankey Bridges, and it was here in 1757 that the original canal, the original line of the canal, entered from this way, Warrington, down that way in a straight line to Sankey Brook, from where boats could then enter the Mersey. So the original connection to the River Mersey was just down here. There was a lock here actually, a lock which would take boats down to river level. In 1762 they decided that that was unfavourable because flooding of silting. It was you had to wait for high tide basically to enter the canal, so they thought, let's put the canal further down this way westward toward Fiddler's Ferry, where they built a second lock connection to the River Mersey. This one becoming redundant there is the original point that the original Sankey Canal ended at. But there's a fair few miles to go yet for us. Right, so now I'm at Fiddler's Ferry. We've made it to Fiddler's Ferry and we're at the Ferry Tavern right here. And what a beautiful, beautiful pub it is. Got a beautiful view as well of the River Mersey. And you can see the Mersey here is almost as full as it gets. I've never seen it this full. It's usually full of silt and sand and not very much water in there. But yeah, you can just see there's been a lot of flooding recently in the past few days. And this is what it gets like. So you can imagine this. Actually, it's very navigable for boats, big Mersey flat boats. Would have gone all the way that way towards Widnes and Liverpool. Right, so why Fiddler's Ferry? Why is it called Fiddler's Ferry? Well, obviously, there was a ferry here. This is the narrowest point of the River Mersey for miles around. Certainly as you go further that way, further west towards Widnes and Liverpool, the mouth of the Mersey just opens up. But here is the narrowest point between Warrington and Runcorn, between the North Bank and the South Bank for miles around. Ideal place for a little rowboat to take people across the water. Anybody who needed to get across from one side to the next. So yeah, and there would have been one here for basically forever, but certainly from like the Norman Conquest, 1066, that kind of era. And it really only stopped in the end of the 19th century, so about 1890, when the Manchester Ship Canal was built. On the other side of this bank over there, the south bank there, where you can see with the reeds, behind that there's the long straight line of the Manchester Ship Canal, running all the way obviously from Manchester. And that really cut off this point over here on the other bank over there. It made an island out of it. It made a bit of a useless area. People didn't need to go that way anymore, or at least if they did, they'd just get caught on another island and they'd have to cross the ship canal somehow, which they couldn't. So yes, the ferry ended about 1890 after about 800, maybe 900 years of operating. But yeah, look how high the river is. Right, so we can see here another bridge which is locked into place. This is a new concrete bridge, or fairly new I suppose, but you can see the footprint there of another swing bridge. The whole canal here would have been covered by swing bridges so that people could get across. And at this point over here was a railway station, Penketh railway station, because there's a line just there put in 1853 following the line of the canal. This part of the canal, by the way, I'm now on is the Transpennine Trail. So there's about a 5-mile stretch of the Transpennine Trail. It might be longer than that actually, which means that this part of the canal is extremely well looked after. So the footpath is great. There's a lot of people on it. There's a lot of ducks heckling me on it, but the view is just, yeah, this is of a canal which is restored almost completely to its max, which is great. So this lock behind me used to be the end point of the canal, or at least one of the end points it had over the years, where traffic could leave the canal and enter the River Mersey over here, one of England's greatest rivers, and certainly during the Industrial Revolution.
The lock here is in fairly good nick today, but it's rarely used, though the boatyard next door keeps the tradition of boating alive for the local area. The canal here is busy with boats of different kinds. These are the first boats I've seen all day. The canal and the train station here made this a busy little place back in the day. Today, however, a little further down, the canal has once again become overgrown with reeds.
So I've left the ferry area now up that way, and you can see the canal has just turned into this big reedy ditch, just full of reeds all the way up that way. Yeah, so we'll see how far this goes. I'm sure it goes in water further down. But you can see there the big monolithic Fiddler's Ferry coal power station, which is what most people associate Fiddler's Ferry with. Thankfully it's closed down now. So we'll try and get a closer look at that as well.
The power station was opened in 1971, built on farmland next to the railway line and the canal. It was one of the largest power stations in the region, with 8 cooling towers arranged into 2 equal groups and visible for many miles around. By this point, the coal fields around St Helens and even the Sankey Canal had very much fallen out of use. So ironically, this large coal power station built next to a large coal field and next to a historic canal made to transport coal actually burnt coal imported from South Yorkshire, and then even abroad. The power station was privatised in 1990 and passed between different companies, ultimately ending up with SSE. The railway line brought the coal in and a signal box remains on the line, which today is barely used at all, but still operational.
So there you go, the brutal Fiddler's Ferry coal power station, which just takes over everything around here, everything in the area, everything in this part of the country. Just look at it, it's huge. It's closed of course today, but it's yet another milestone on this industrial history of Sankey Canal.
The Sankey was born for coal, and by its side coal was doomed to die here, as burning the fossil fuel for energy became more and more unpopular. Not only was coal the worst contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, but its thick, poisonous clouds were bad for human health. By the early noughties, pressure to close coal power stations was gathering momentum, and Fiddler's Ferry was finally closed in 2020. The coal era has closed in this part of the world, having outstayed its welcome long enough. As we've just seen, it was the closure of the collieries that spelled the end for the Sankey Canal. At their peak, there were more than 20 collieries and pits in the area. Their decline in the early 1900s and the preference for transporting coal by rail led to a fall in traffic on the canal. The majority of the traffic was in fact going the other way, inland, carrying raw sugar for the Sankey Sugar Works at Newtonley-Willows. North of the sugar works, the canal was closed, and swing bridges replaced by fixed bridges in St Helens town centre as early as 1931. By 1959, trade of sugar on the canal had ceased, spelling the end of the canal's working life. The Sankey now had to face a choice in retirement, like other canals up and down the country, as Britain entered its post-industrial decline. Survive as an attractive place for boating, or let the modern world and nature take it back over. Sadly for the Sankey, it was the latter. A lack of funding and economic demand meant that it was cheaper to let it die than try to maintain it. Yet other canals in the country have been restored in the last 30 or 40 years, as people began to see canals as places of leisure and outdoor enjoyment. Locally, the Bridgewater Canal is today well looked after and enjoyed by boaters as part of the canal network, as is the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. The Huddersfield Canal was fully restored, and the Cheshire Ring is one of the most popular places in the country for boaters. Even the Lancaster Canal is doing well along most of its length. But not the oldest of them all, the Sankey. Isolated from the rest of the canal network, its only access points are Widnes and Fiddler's Ferry, which require skillful navigation of the muddy Mersey. In other words, it's a short, cut-off section that is incredibly difficult to access for most boats, let alone narrow boats.
Right, so from here you can see all 8 of the cooling towers of the chimneys of the old power station over there. No longer in operation, but over there you can see some industry still going, still pumping things into the atmosphere, and it's got a bit of an acrid smell around here, not very nice. But still, this part of the Mersey they've tried to make into a bit of a wildlife haven, a bit of a beauty spot, and it is a very nice place to come, especially on a day like today. Really makes you happy to be around here, to come from this part of the world. So yes, it's a beautiful place, a wildlife haven full of rare birds and rare grasses. Right, yes, so this is the River Mersey, and you can see it a lot better now here from this point. And you can just imagine 100, 150, 200 years ago, this just being full of Mersey flatboats, taking all sorts of wares to and from Manchester and down towards Runcorn and Liverpool. Especially on a day like today when the river is in full flood, and you can see there's only a little bit of mud now. Actually, there's quite a lot of water in there. You can imagine that just being full of boats. But yeah, of course, the River Mersey, the history goes further back than that. Of course, it was the boundary between Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of Northumbria, where I'm stood now, and Mercia to the south bank over there. And it would have been a hell of a boundary to cross for people, even in boats. So yeah, and of course down there, Runcorn, I don't know if you can see that silhouetted against the sun, unfortunately, where the bridge is over there at Runcorn. There was an Anglo-Saxon fort built by Ethelfleda, the daughter of King Alfred of Wessex. So yes, very powerful woman, one of the most powerful women in pre-industrial Britain. So yes, what a nice day to be alive.
The area across the canal is today industrial, but it's a shadow of what it used to be in the late 19th century and early 20th century, when large chemical works used to occupy this part of Widnes. The works here used a vast web of rail lines to produce different industrial products, including copper and alkalis. Despite this huge industry rising along its banks, the Sankey Canal never benefited very much from this trade, because of the railway. Instead, it acted as an aid for getting goods onto the rail line, with various cranes and landing stages. Today, the only large thing around here is the Mersey Gateway Road Bridge, which crosses the canal and then the river. After that is the last part of the journey, as the Sankey ends at Spike Island, where more chemical works used to crowd its banks.
Right, so now we've finally come to the end of the Sankey Canal at somewhere called Spike Island, which is this behind me. The canal is this here, and you can see it has two locks. There are two locks taking it down into the Mersey. There's two locks because the tide was so rapid at going up and down here that if boats were on the river, they needed to get on the canal desperately. Well, they couldn't afford to queue up, so they had to put two locks here to make sure all the boats off the river could get onto the canal and not get stranded in the mud. You can see the water level has already fallen quite a bit since, what, half an hour ago when I was cycling up near Fiddler's Ferry. Yeah, so imagine being stuck down there with a boat full of cargo, waiting for hours, getting raided by locals. So yes, they put two locks here to take onto the canal. So that's the canal, but over on this side you've got this entrance here which leads to a big square pool, or a little square pool really, and that is Widnes Dock, the old Widnes Dock. So ships leaving the river could go straight into the dock there and unload or reload cargo without the need to go on the canal. They probably didn't need to go on the canal, most of them, so they had a little dock there for those ships. Whereas in between and all around Spike Island there was a railway dockyard. So the railway line were coming here with full of all the goods, mostly coal, but other things as well, and load onto the ships, etc. It was actually the world's first railway dockyard. Just this little bit here. Very, very surprising. And then of course, much later years, this was all used for chemical works. There was a lot of chemical works on Spike Island, running all the way through to the back of the island over there, following the canal of course. So yeah, this is beautiful and idyllic today. A lot of people come here just for a walk, just for a stroll. A lot of seagulls, a lot of pigeons, a lot of nice ducks and rare birds as well on the canal. A lot of boats as well, pretty boats. But what, 100 years ago, 200 years ago really, this would have been one hell of a dirty, horrible place to come. Quite the opposite. Thank God for progress. But yeah, that's the end of the line. And so there you go, this is the end of the Sankey Canal as it enters the River Mersey at Widnes. This is the last extension that was built to it. This right behind me, there's twin locks over here, only one of which still has water in it. But yeah, there you go, what a beautiful day it's been, what a wonderful cycle, what an adventure. Trying to find this old canal, the remnants of this old canal, and coming finally to a place here where there's hope that it could be back to its former glory. This a great example of what it could look like, this entire length of its course. Yeah, so thanks so much for joining me on these couple of videos. I hope you enjoyed them. And yeah, if you do fancy checking out the Sankey Canal, go for it. It's such a wonderful little place to come and beautiful as well. So thanks very much for watching, and let's hope that one day we'll find the funding to bring this back up to its former glory. But anyway, for now, I'll leave you with England's first industrial waterway. Bye.